Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 466. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind interested in learning about trauma and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's Trauma Therapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Leslie Ellis. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So Dr. Ellis is a teacher, author, speaker, and psychotherapist. She teaches therapists how to help clients access their inner life and implicit memory through dream therapy and focusing somatic work, with a focus on working with PTSD and complex trauma. Her book, A Clinician's Guide to Dream Therapy, was recently published by Routledge. Leslie has a PhD in clinical and somatic psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology and developed a new approach to treating PTSD nightmares for her dissertation. She has a master's from Pacific Graduate Institute and is vice president of the International Focusing Institute. All right. Welcome once again. So before we get going here, Leslie, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you're calling from now.
Originally, I'm from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. I was an Air Force brat, so I had no fixed address for many years of my life. So I would say I call Vancouver, British Columbia home because I've lived there the longest. Okay. And I'm calling from Palm Desert right now in the beautiful sunshine. I'm quite lucky to be escaping part of the winter here.
Oh, nice. All right. So let's kind of dive in here. Let's start out with how you kind of got into the field of psychotherapy in general, and then let's kind of venture into this kind of focus on helping clients access their inner life and so forth.
Sure. Yeah, I actually started my working life as a journalist. I was a journalist for about 10 years, working mainly in the technology industry and in business, and I got a little bored with it, I guess, at a certain point, because business stories are all, I know probably business people would take objection to this, but they all have a similar trajectory. And the questions I was asking were kind of all along the same lines. And I got more interested in the people than I did in their business stories. And they would open up to me too. I was a good listener. So part of it was that I really wanted to actually be, more involved with the people than their work, and so that was a big shift for me. I had to go back to school, kind of later, early 30s, and do a whole nother degree.
Oh, that's a big shift at that time. So continue. I want to hear this.
Well, then I just a friend suggested Pacific Graduate Institute, which. I immediately, as soon as I looked at the type of coursework they offered, and especially a focus on Jungian depth psychology, I immediately just had this sense that it was the right place for me. And I think it was probably the best educational experience I've had. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the people that I met there are still my dearest friends. And it was a great education in inner life and dream work. And I really learned so much, not just about how to listen, but how to really be with my own inner life. It changed the trajectory of my life. I think that was a really important time for me going to Pacifica.
So prior to this kind of decision and realization about how you wanted things to kind of unfold in your life, had you done therapy? Had you gone through therapy yourself? Did you have experiences in that venue?
A little bit. Mostly I started to see therapists once I was in the program. It was a requirement that we have 50 sessions. So, 2 years of every other week. And I tried various Jungian oriented therapists and really didn't, maybe it was the specific person more than the actual form of therapy. But I really got a lot of traction when I started focusing, doing focusing oriented therapy and this embodied way of working. It really suited me, and it made me realize, many things, but that there's a whole world in there, and that, it really started to teach me about trauma and redefining it as well, because I didn't consider myself someone who had experienced a lot of trauma. And the fact is I did, and everybody does in different ways. So it taught me, about dissociation and about um, kind of the subtle ways that we react and how it carries forward. I really feel like that taught me so much. Doing a couple of years of that kind of inner work taught me how to be with other people in that way.
For those, I'm just gonna get a little post-it note here. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar, or kind of we need a reminder of what focusing, can you just kind of give us the nutshell, if you will?
Yes, yeah. Focusing was developed in the late '60s, early '70s by Eugene Gendlin at the University of Chicago, and his contemporary was Carl Rogers. So he took he was a philosopher, Gendlin, and he took psychology as well from Rogers, and together they did this experiment looking for what makes people succeed in therapy. Basically, what is the thing that differentiates those who get somewhere in therapy and those who don't? And what they found, Rogers was hoping it would be this unconditional positive regard, but what they found was it was something about the way people were speaking, and it's sort of halting, kind of not sure, would stop and get and reflect, and sort of as if they're catching hold of something that's not quite formed yet. And Jenlin was interested in that, wondering what are they doing, and what, is it something I could repeat? Could I teach it? And so the steps of focusing came out of this experiment, and the steps were basically ways of looking inside in the moment. So it's so in therapy, when somebody's able to stop, reflect in, not just talk about a story in the second person or as if it's already happened, but as if it's what they're catching hold of right in the moment. That's focusing, and that can be applied in any form of therapy. But focusing specifically teaches those that way of being with yourself in the moment in an embodied way.
So, I mean, I can surmise myself about what might have attracted you to that, but in your own words, what kind of grabbed hold of you about that?
Actually, when I was a kid, I think I was born premature, and I spent the first, couple months of my life essentially alone, and I developed a very independent way of being. And I think I also really dissociated a lot from my feelings throughout my childhood and adolescence, and this was a way to reach inside and actually, find myself. I guess it was hard for me. I was a mystery. I could, sometimes my feelings were very far from me, and I found them through this process and found, oh yeah, I am in there, and I do have, a lot going on. And not that I, didn't have feelings at all, but that I didn't have a language for it. I didn't always know how to articulate my feelings. So it taught me really in a deep way how to find those. And I do find, like in my work as a therapist, that's not uncommon for people that, that find a big blank inside or don't have language and need to develop that capacity. So my own experiences help me sit with people who really have trouble articulating or finding their feelings, because focusing is a gentle but very reliable way to access that.
You talked about, looking at yourself as, or thinking of yourself as someone who hadn't experienced trauma. That kind of jumped out at me because I was very much like that myself. But and I'm not asking you to, rehash everything, but what did you unfold? What did you uncover, in a sense? What did you experience?
Well, my start in life was traumatic. First of all, I was, essentially what felt like abandoned. I think I nearly died a few times in that early part of my life. And then I was in a car accident when I was 15, where I was nearly killed, and I nearly drowned when I was 17. I didn't, yeah, I had and those are just kind of like the highlight reel. I had lots of traumatic events. I just somehow, because I was so stoic, I didn't identify it as trauma. I thought trauma was something much more like overt, like being abused. I thought that was trauma, and that all of this other stuff was just sort of life and accidents and
right.
yeah.
Deal with it stuff. Yeah. Okay. So this is really exciting to me. This whole idea of, being in the moment and being able to articulate even what's going in the moment. So how did things unfold such that you're interested in working with trauma and so forth?
So when I finished my master's, I was pregnant with my daughter Grace, who's now 20. So that means it was 20 years ago when I finished. And so I wasn't able to go into practice right away, and I wanted to keep my hand in it, or my head in the therapy world. And so I took another 2-year program on focusing-oriented therapy with an Aboriginal woman named Shirley Turcott, whose main focus was treating complex trauma. So it wasn't just focusing, it was focusing with a trauma-informed lens. And this was before all of the information that we're now getting about the polyvagal theory and all of the embodied ways that we carry trauma. So I was way ahead of the curve. In fact, not entirely respected for the way I was working among my peers, because it was so not the norm in that time. But I really learned from a master, and we worked as a cohort over 2 years with each other, and a lot of the people in that cohort had experienced quite severe trauma. So I learned actively, and it really, from the get-go, I had a combination of working with the inner life and dreams, and then immediately got this embodied trauma, complex trauma way of treating that was really profound for me. Learning to work with implicit trauma, how to work with people who have no words for their trauma experiences, like mine, which was the first traumatic experience was before I even could really conceptualize things. But I still have an embodied imprint of that time in the incubator, for example. I worked through some of that. So I started out with all of these tools, and then I learned to really listen. And so then my clients really taught me the rest of what I know about trauma, because if you can listen with this client-centered, it has a Carl Rogers kind of influence on it as well. This is focusing is very client-centered and very non-directive. And for a lot of people who've had really, early complex trauma, that sort of opening, that kind of invitation allowed them to access places that they hadn't really accessed before. And I just learned how to be with that in a way that was well paced. And it took me a while. At first, I was a little too eager to jump in and help, and to, try to explain to them what was going on. I even got into theory sometimes. It was crazy. When I was really not feeling super confident, that I'd start to explain the theory. I catch myself later and go, oh my goodness. Okay. So that didn't seem to go over very well. But over time I learned, really is a profound way of listening that enables people to listen to their bodies. And if there's this feeling of safety and containment in that space, then all of these deeper voices start to come forward. And so I just learned really with the all of that background I learned by doing the work, and got to be kind of sought out for that, especially for PTSD work. I worked for WorkSafe BC for a while and became one of their PTSD specialists, and so I ended up getting a lot of very interesting and dramatic cases, and really deepened my respect. One thing I have to say about all of this is that the work has really deepened my respect for anybody who's experienced trauma, because I feel like this is one thing that Shirley Turcott told us right from the get-go, is to not see these people as broken, because they're actually very strong and have gone through something tremendous. And I have really, that's been shown to me over and over again, that these, when we, and all of us do suffer various forms of trauma, but we, it's painful and it has impact, but it also, people are incredibly resilient, and this shows in the work. It comes out in the work. In my doctoral work, I did a research project on working with the nightmares of people with PTSD that were refugees, and their stories were so really tragic and horrific. But to a person, these people in my study were so resilient, so grateful just to be able to do something with their nightmares and to have support. I was quite blown away by their strength, and have been just all the way through my career as a therapist. Been so impressed with people's willingness to go there and
Yeah.
yeah.
What I know it's different for everybody, but if you could give us a snapshot of what focusing looks like working with someone who's experienced complex PTSD. I mean, what you're talking about listening and creating these safe spaces, but what is it about that work you're doing with focusing? What does that look like?
Well, yeah, that's an enormous question. It's really different with each person, but I can try to I can give you an example. I think that's probably the best way to think about it, because what I've found is that when people have, I don't ask, about their trauma. They don't sit down and go, so tell me all the terrible things that have happened to you. I just mostly ask for what is going on in their life right now that isn't, working as well as they would like. And so in this example, a woman was saying, that in work and in social situations, she just has this pattern, or had this pattern, where she was always kind of left out and always on the outside, or found her way to feeling like she wasn't wanted or excluded, and this pattern repeated. And so in focusing, then I would ask, okay, so talk about that just sort of in a general way, and then not very much either, and then get a sense of where in your body that's held. Where do you most feel that internally? And then usually there will be some kind of sensation. Often it's in the trunk of the body, but she ended up, it was really dramatic, this session. It was one of the earlier sessions in my work, but she had this splitting headache. She got a feeling as though there was a band around her whole head that was squeezing so tight that she could barely stand it. It was very powerful sensations, and then of being cold and light, and all of this collection of sensations is kind of swept over her. And she realized, both of us realized, that this was actually a reenactment of her birth. And then she said, oh, well, I was adopted when I was right after birth. And I wasn't wanted right from the beginning of my life. And then I was adopted into a family where I was not, not really taken in. She had quite a difficult family life. She was kind of on the outside in her family too. So when this isn't unusual, where if you get into the body for looking for a correlation or something where your body holds something that you're experiencing right now, it will take you right to the very first time that you felt that, and take you to the genesis of that particular feeling or issue or complex, or whatever you want to call it. So she got in touch with this. Oh, this has been with me right from the very start. And really then what you do with that isn't to try to fix it or change it, but to bear witness and let that let the body really show what that feeling has got to say. It will unfold, and it has its own inherent motion. It was this particular collection of sensations was sitting there waiting to be unfolded. It came out very quickly when I asked in this way. And the way forward is also inherent in the felt sense. So you don't, as a therapist, have to try and ask something like, what would make this all okay? You just let the person kind of follow it through, and it's like it's had this pent up sort of energy that's released, and it carries the person forward. They know what to do next. It's really quite an organic process once it starts. Does that help?
It does,
Yeah.
and it sounds pretty amazing. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of allowance and self-trust for, and you kind of creating the space so that the client can feel that honoring for themselves what's going on in their own process and their own timeline, and which is can be made a lot different by even just that little subtle question, which might seem benign to many of us. What would make this better, right? That can shift the whole course of the treatment in a sense. But let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Dr. Leslie Ellis. She can be reached at drleslieellis.com. That's drleslieellis.com. I'll have that linked up at the show notes page of the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Leslie, I want to touch on something that you kind of referenced a little bit earlier, and that was maybe kind of when you were first starting out, how you kind of made a mistake, if you will, like early clinical error. Can we talk about one of those and kind of what you learned from that? A lot of newer clinicians who are just starting out really love this question. I get emails a lot, keep asking that question because, so what would you have to offer?
Well, yeah, there's so many examples. I think that, the one I alluded to already is about, really talking about theory when I had felt anxious, and when there's a big empty space and I didn't know how to fill it, I would just fill it with explanations of the person's problem and how they got to be that way. Oh, I was kind of, came across as a know-it-all, and I'm sure, or I don't know how they experienced me, but I really noticed that when I was unsure of what to say, which every new therapist is, I would fill the space. And that was, I'm sure it was off-putting, because what I've learned in this ability to listen in a focusing-oriented way is that the more space you give, the deeper the person can go into themselves, and the more they're invited to do that. And that's where the healing journey is. But I would talk too much. So I've really, at first, I gave myself this sort of edict to say, okay, when there's a silence, after you've said something and there's a big silence, you're not allowed to be the one that breaks the silence. I would make myself stay silent until the client broke the silence, unless it got really long and awkward, and I might ask, hey, are you okay there, or something. But otherwise, if I put something out there or invited them to reflect, to wait until they actually said something. And that was a big learning for me. And I also worked right at the beginning. I was in an internship at Share Counseling Center, so working with addiction. And I think some of the toughest cases I ever saw in my career were those very first ones. And I don't know if this is a mistake or just something I regret, but one of the clients I really had a deep connection with, she was struggling with a cocaine addiction, and she had been getting some traction, and we'd really made a great connection. And she didn't show up for her appointment. And so I phoned her up right away and caught her when she was using. And she was so ashamed by that. I know that she never came back. I don't even think she ever came back to the center. And I realized that I couldn't know that was going to be the case, that she would pick up the phone. And but I didn't really think about it, sort of think about the potential of what could happen. And I feel like, that was something I would do differently if I had to do it again, because it just felt like it was a real tragedy, and that the shame of being sort of caught out in that state was too much for her she couldn't face me, even though I had no judgment. I was really, I feel badly about that still.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. As you spent more time learning about focusing and getting experienced and working with people who've been impacted by trauma. I'm curious about your own experience and what was going on for you. And, you talked about identifying yourself as someone who hadn't been traumatized. What was your own? Can you talk a little bit about your own experience, and were you being triggered and so forth? What was that experience like?
You mean when I started working with really severe trauma?
Yeah.
I was actually, it's funny. I have been quite surprisingly able to sit with people with quite severe trauma. I think at the time when I didn't really understand, how deep my own wounds were, I feel like I just thought I was just able to be a little separate from it, and I could just, really kind of hold it and not be. I don't actually know why this is the case, but I theorize it was just because I didn't have deep access to my feelings, so I could hold and hear some very difficult stories, and it was fine. But over time, especially the more I did my own therapy, and also having a child really opens up more empathy as I started to work more in this intersubjective way. I started to get deeply affected by my clients, not to the point where it was too much, although at times I would need to talk to somebody and really, debrief some of the painful things that, we share the load, I think, is part of what we do. But it sort of evolved, I suppose, as I became more in touch with my own feelings. I was able to feel the feelings of my clients more deeply. And then the work became deeper, more challenging in some ways, but also, I think, more real. I think I became a better therapist. And I really also needed then to find ways to metabolize some of the pain. I feel like it is impossible to sit in very painful stories and not have some of it affect us. And so I, would go into the woods or go into my kayak or talk to my colleagues. I had to find ways to really keep moving those painful stories through. Otherwise, I could sense them in my body. Sometimes I could physically sense them with certain people and certain stories. Particularly, I found, as I sort of thought about it a lot, that when people are not deeply in touch with their own story, their own felt sense, when they're kind of dissociated from it, that's when I would feel it the most strongly. It was as if they were, giving it to me to hold on to, is how I see it. And so it gave me a clue that, this is what their feelings are that they're not able to really access yet. And I would get a sense of it, but I needed then to do something with it to move it on, or I would feel it sometimes as a physical pain, sometimes as a really specific kind of pain, strangely.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so as we kind of wind down here, we didn't really touch upon your book, which is A Clinician's Guide to Dream Therapy. Again, I'll have this linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Talk a little bit about that. What was the impetus for writing this and so forth?
Sure. So part of it is that I did my doctoral dissertation on dreams. I've always been fascinated by dreams. They're integral to the way I work. I combine the focusing practice with dream work because there is a way that the dreams touch on the things that are just coming to the surface, and so that combination of catching those things that are just surfacing and getting the felt sense is there's a strong synergy in catching those emerging areas that want support, want attention, want to heal. And so I have just become a really huge fan of dream work. And so I think sadly the therapy world has gone away from it to a large degree, unless people take some specialized, like I did, a Jungian oriented program. In the mainstream counseling programs now, that dream work is rarely taught. And to me, it feels like a massive loss of something that really drops people deeply into their, what's really salient to them. It's a way that makes therapy so much more efficient and creative and interesting and deep and all of these things. And I think therapists that haven't had any training in dream work are kind of intimidated by the dream world. I feel it's complicated. If they've read any Jung or Freud, there's a lot of objections that arise. It's too complicated. It's antiquated. And I really know that it doesn't have to be that way. It's an experiential practice that's not super complicated if you just know a few simple things. So I wrote the book basically trying to provide if you don't know anything about dream work, here's a really simple, clear way of working with dreams experientially that anybody can incorporate. And so I'm trying to bring dream work back into the therapy practice by making it accessible. So that was my mission in writing that book.
So in a sense, clinicians of all types and experience levels could utilize this book.
Anybody, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Anybody. Mm-hmm.
All right, very cool.
Yeah.
All right. In terms of other kind of resources that have been inspiring you, whether dream related or trauma related or not, could you offer kind of a go-to book recommendation?
Well, I mean, there's so many that I, those other people have mentioned. So I wanted to. The first thing that came to mind was not specifically a trauma book, but Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning, and that's because I really feel like sometimes we can get a little bit hopeless or just kind of sunk in a little bit of the sad stories we hear. And I understand, trauma survivors to be so resilient, and really, I think our capacity is there to overcome most anything. And if you read Viktor Frankl's story and see that he could overcome something so horrific, I think it's just inspiring. It really deeply inspired me. Just really at the time I read it many, many years ago, but I always think back to it when I sit with someone and I feel like, I'm losing hope here. I feel like it's so heavy and can we get through this? And then I think, well, yes, then human spirit is indomitable. And here's an example of someone who had overcome potentially the worst kind of trauma. And so, not that I like to compare, but it's just for that reason I recommend that book.
So, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Again, we'll have that listed. Mm-hmm. Before we close out here, Leslie, I want to touch on something because, as you've been talking, what I'm getting a lot from you is this really kind of incredible way you have in which you work that, you talked about really listening and just creating a space and openness and kind of honoring your client's process and experience and not looking at them as individuals who've been broken. How did you get there? I mean, did you start out like that? You talked before about, needing to fix or wanting to help. Yeah. What was that process like for you?
I am, for whatever reason, an eternal optimist. I just think I might have been born that way. I really just always think the best of people. I always think situations are going to turn out well. Even, when evidence shows me that things are not good, I still have this incredible feeling like I feel like anybody can be helped, their trauma can be resolved in, maybe some of it's not true, but that's actually just how I approach the world. And I feel lucky that is how I think I must be made, because I don't remember ever not feeling that way, even in the face of lots of challenges. I just feel like, well, it's going to work next time or next time. And I can't really say that it's one sort of thing that happened that made me feel that way. I just do believe in the best.
What about in terms of when you first started as a therapist? What was your purpose? Was it to fix or help or change or whatever? And did that change in a sense? Did that evolve?
Well, I think probably like most new therapists, I felt like it was my job to help and fix, and to there's this pressure to perform a little bit at the beginning, where if you feel like if this person has this, has these troubles, and it's my job, even though it's not. It's really up to the client, and we all sort of told this. There's still a lot of pressure when you're starting, just to have some results, to have to see progress. And I think until you've done the work for quite a while, you understand it is like a spiral. It'll go around in circles. It will look like sometimes it's not going somewhere, but it is circling around and coming to a different level each time. And people have their own path. So even then I was optimistic, but I would be feeling like, oh, it's not happening fast enough, or I'm not doing enough, or I must, not, I feel I would take on a little bit too much responsibility for what was really the client's journey. And that's really evolved. I really haven't, now I'm not really in any hurry, and it seems the less of a hurry I'm in, or the more the more I'm accepting of just what is, and being with that, and really helping whoever I'm sitting with to be in kind of that more accepting space, the more things actually do shift, ironically.
Awesome. All right, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you, Leslie?
Probably email is the best. I think LAE2317 is the best address, or
Okay.
to check out my website, which you've mentioned, because that gives people an overview of all the things I'm up to, and there's a contact form in the website as well.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for coming on here. It was a delight talking to you, and inspiring talking to you. I love it. Really appreciate the way you're working and everything. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
All right.